Okay, good afternoon, everybody. No, good morning. Welcome to what is our 167th Wedding Online Sports Economics Seminar. We have Luca Fumarco presenting. It's the second time that we've been fortunate enough to have him presenting. He previously presented on boxing, and today he's going to present on hockey and labour market behaviour, strategic behaviours in a labour market with mobility restricting contractual provisions, evidence from the National Hockey League. Just before Luca gets started, a couple of just bits to mention. If, as previously discussed, you want to join the WhatsApp group because the chat on Microsoft Teams doesn't work very well, please let me know. Send me your phone number and I can add you to the group. The other things to say are, well, the only other thing to say is if you are going to the European Sports Economics Association conference in Rotterdam at the end of August, you have until Monday if you're a presenter to register. I'm going to be doing that after today's talk, but obviously just a reminder for anyone else to whom that affects. Luca, are you happy to take questions as we go along?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Well, in which case, all yours, Luca.
Thank you. So I will share the screen now.
Great.
All right, so I would like to thank James first for inviting me again to this nice cycle of seminars to present my work. So as James has said, this study was recently published on Oxford Economic Papers, but I'm really happy to receive any questions, also to discuss possible evolutions in the future, as I will mention at the end of the presentation. So this paper is about, as the title suggests, strategic behavior in labor market with mobility restricting contractual provisions, also called non-compete clauses. And here we use data from the National Hockey League. So the focus of this study is on strategic behavior, right, in industrial organizations. So strategic behavior is when individuals perform better when performance goals, such as quotas, and the end of the contract are approaching, right? Because they want, for example, a contract renewal. There are two very famous studies. One was from Ash from 1990 that finds that Navy employees increase their effort when the reward is within reach, while they decrease their effort when the reward is surely achieved. Then there is another paper from Hoyer from 98 that finds that salespeople try harder to reach their quota when the payment period is approaching. Okay. So over the last 30 years or so, there has been little consideration about possible mediators. That is how this strategic behavior changes with the characteristics of the individuals. So this is where our study steps in. So in this study, we use a panel dataset that follows over 10 years National Hockey League players. So this is more precisely an unbalanced panel dataset. So there are some players that are followed over all the 10 years, and many players are followed for just a few years. Okay. So data from the National Hockey League are characterized by 5 main features that are important for our study. First of all, we have proxies for workers' actual and expected performance. We can observe the tenure status of the workers that also determine their mobility and whether the mobility is restricted contractually. Also, we can observe like potential geographic mobility. Workers can be followed over time, and also the NHL per se is interesting because it has rules and tacit norms that should reduce workers' incentives to manipulate efforts. So, in fact, the National Hockey League is extremely regulated. If you look at the collective agreements, they are very long, and there are a lot of details. It's really impressive. It's like a book. Okay, so against this background, we identified that there are too many empirical problems. First of all, many of the past studies have used relatively small samples, and that might be problematic because researchers would have to face low statistical power and also overweight contract length outliers. Also, to the best of our knowledge, none of the previous studies followed the individual over time. So why that? Because most of the studies have used like repeated cross-section techniques. In your panel data techniques like we do, that is, we used individual fixed effects, right, to control for time invariant individual characteristics. So I will tell you already some of the most important results of this paper. We find that on average, National Hockey League players do not perform differently in the last year. Okay, so there is no strategic behavior. And this is something that we expected given the multiple NHL rules and norms. Our additional estimations, though, detect some heterogeneous behaviors that depend on the tenure of the players, the perceived expected performance of the players, and their mobility. More particularly, we find that first on the young players, that is restricted free agents, with high expected mobility but low expected performance, tend to behave strategically and perform better. Differently, older players, called unrestricted free agents, with high expected mobility tend to underperform, as they might have like an outside option. They could move back to Europe. But I will describe more in detail all the terms for the people who are not used to NHL. So I give you some background about the Institute, in particular the NHL. There are two types of players, right? So when the contract of a player expires, the bargaining power of that player usually depends on the performance of the player, right? But in this specific case of the NHL, it depends also on contract clauses and the alternative options that are faced by the players. So there is this peculiarity of the contract clauses. So what clauses are included in the contract depend on the status of the player. And the skaters, that is the players, can fall into two categories: unrestricted free agents or restricted free agents. Just very shortly, unrestricted free agents can go wherever they want at the end of the contract. It's like free agency in football nowadays, while restricted free agents are people who, even if the contract is expired, they cannot move wherever they want, right? There is some veto power of the former team. So it's more similar to the free agency in Europe before the Bosman ruling. So unrestricted free agents, who are they? They are players that have spent at least 7 seasons in the NHL or are 27 years of age or older. So at the end of their contract, they become unrestricted free agents, so they can go wherever they want. And the former team doesn't have any control on them and is not entitled to any compensation. The case of the restricted free agents is quite different. So they are younger, right? They have spent less than 7 seasons in NHL. They are younger than 27, so typically when you enter the NHL, you are 21, right? You are just done with the university. So what is that happens? So your contract finishes, right? It ends. You are restricted free agent when the current team or the previous team, the team with whom you had the contract that just expired, presents a qualifying offer. What is a qualifying offer is basically a contract offer which has a length of at least one season, and the salary that is offered to the player is at least the same as the previous one. Okay, so if you receive a qualifying offer at the end of the contract, you are a restricted free agent. So once you receive this qualifying offer, basically the team retain negotiating rights, right? You are not free to go anywhere you want. So this feature of the contract resembles what is called also non-compete employment clauses. Now, what happens if the player rejects the offer, the qualifying offer? So the player remains a restricted free agent, but he can sign an offer sheet for any other NHL club. However, that is not it, right? So the player cannot automatically move to the new club because the current club can still match the offer. Was I clear on this? So you receive an offer from your latest team. You become a restricted free agent. You might reject it. You might receive an offer from another team. You cannot move immediately. You have to wait for your current team to decide whether to match the offer. And whenever the offer is matched, you cannot move. Okay? So there is a sort of veto power. Moreover, if the new team's offer is large enough, so the new team has offered you a contract that is better than the contract offered you by your previous team, right? And your previous team doesn't match it, still the prospective team has to pay the former team, okay? The former team has to be compensated somehow, for example, with the draft picks or money. So this feature resembles other characteristics of the contract, other features of the contract that are called buyout payments. Okay. So based on these rules, restricted free agents have less bargaining power than unrestricted free agents, right? Because you know that at the end of your contract, you can go wherever you want, and your team has a lot of power, because even if you receive offers from other teams, you can still remain in your present team. And this should also impact the propensity to engage in strategic behavior, right? So how interesting is this for the standard labor market, this type of study, right? So these rules, that is buyout and non-compete clauses, are used also in the standard labor market. There was a recent paper from Xi published on 2023 on Econometrica that discusses these non-compete employment contracts, and it shows that they are very prevalent in publicly listed US firms, where 60% of executives have signed this type of contracts, right? These contracts with these with buyouts and non-compete clauses. But it's even more frequent this type of contracts with this characteristic are very frequent. Like the Federal Trade Commission estimated that about 30 million people have signed a contract with this type of clauses. That is about 20% of American workers. It's really a lot. And quite surprisingly, non-compete clauses may apply also to low-wage workers as well, such as cleaners. This is something that I read recently on in outlets such as NPR. Okay, so what data set did we use? We scraped data from the NHLnumbers.com website. The period that we cover goes from 2007-8 to 2016-17. A couple of seasons before 2007-8, they adopted the new collective agreements, and a couple of seasons after 2016-17, there's been COVID, right? So this period, 2007-8, 16-17, is quite uniform, right? No extreme event has happened in the NHL. We have data on more than 6,000 player season observations, that is 1,600 individual skaters. More than 90 of them appear in the dataset for all 10 seasons, while about 400 of them appears only once. Okay. These players are players we observe their statistics, their performance, only during the regular season. So we exclude statistics that relate to the playoff, okay? Because, for instance, these players who play playoff play more games. They also face benefit from additional bonuses, additional incentives, and so on. Okay, we focus also on players who have multi-year contracts. So they have a contract of at least 2 years. Because the problem is that if you had a 1-year contract, in that contract, there could be strategy behavior, that contract is both the first year and the last year of the contract, right? So it's not very comparable to all the other contracts that we have in the dataset. Also, we exclude goalkeepers because their performance is measured in different ways. Okay. Now, how did we measure the performances of players? We investigate the cumulated performance of players at the end of the regular season. And we focus on those performances that are included in collective agreements. One is points per game, which measures the sum of individual player seasonal goals and assists, plus minus per game. And this is something that measures the impact of an individual skater on the game, right? So it's the difference between the sum of pluses and sum of minuses. So a plus is a player receives a plus when his team scores without having a manpower advantage in the ring. So the number of players in his team on the rink in that moment is the same as the number of players of the other team in that moment. So these pluses are summed to the minuses, right? And when you get a minus, when your team suffers a goal, when you are in the rink and your team is not short-handed. So short-handed is the opposite of having a manpower advantage. For instance, one of your teammates that is currently on the rink has committed a foul, so has to sit on the bench for a while. The third performance measure that we use is penalty minutes per game, which captures basically the player's intensity in the rink and also the willingness to sacrifice for the team. So these three measures capture different aspects of the performance of the players, right? There are also other performance statistics, but these are the only ones that are included in the collective agreements. I think there is also a fourth one that is just total amount of games, I think. But we haven't included it. We have investigated this, but it's, I think, in the appendix. And it's included already in these measures because we have points per game, etc. Okay. So we have also, I didn't mention it earlier, but we have excluded all the players that did not play any amount of minutes during the regular season. Okay, so to investigate the role of different incentive structures, we split the players that we have, right, between unrestricted free agents or restricted free agents, not restricted or unrestricted in that moment, but what they would be at the end of their contract, right? Then we further divide the restricted free agents between low and high performance players, and we do that using information on promised performance bonus. Why only restricted free agents? Because they are the only players who can receive a bonus, at least to the best of our knowledge, right? Unrestricted free agents don't have a promised bonus. And the proxy for the expected performance is measured as your promised performance bonus divided by seasonal wage, okay? And why we do that? Because basically you expect that this ratio is really high for players that are not that skilled, while the ratio is lower for players that are very skilled. Because the idea is that for players that are very skilled, the fixed amount of money that they receive at the end of the season is very high and is much higher than other players. So players are promised a bonus at the end of the regular season if they perform well enough, and this well enough is an ex-ante cumulated season performance target that is based on these measures that are included in the collective agreement. So basically, you can sign with the team a contract that include the promise that you will receive a bonus if you score X goals, no, X points during the season. Okay. We don't know whether these people actually received the bonus at the end of the season. Okay. So here I will jump immediately into the the main result, the results of the primary analysis, right? Where we use all the players together. So what we do is that we regress the outcome variable, that is one of these three measures, on a dummy for last season, okay, last season of the contract, then age square, contract length, not years at the end, to the end, like not a year elapsed or years to the end of the contract, but is a contract length, like when you sign the contract, right? Then we have a player fixed effect, team fixed effect, and season fixed effect. What you observe here is that there is no evidence of strategic behavior on average, right? When we have all players together. So here we would like to stress that this information on strategic behavior, this effect or null effect that we find, is purged from the general team performance. So it's measured as a player's performance in terms of deviation from the mean outcome of the team in that season. Also, the results are equivalent to those that we obtain with slightly different specifications. That is when we introduce like the interaction between team and season, or team and season t minus one, that is the previous season. And also the results are the same when we exclude contract length. Why should we exclude contract length? Because it's possible that contract length is endogenous. Okay. However, we have conducted a series of tests. It doesn't look like it's endogenous. And you might wonder why. How is it possible? Like the length of your contract should be endogenous, right? Because it depends on your performance. But actually, in particular, if you are restricted free agent, the contracts are standard. Like what happens is that you usually receive a 3 years contract and then 3 years again. While it might vary a bit for unrestricted free agents, and there was much more variation many years ago, okay, when there was a different collective agreements. But now the contract length is quite standardized. Also, in a previous version of this paper, we investigated also shirking behavior. That is, in this table, like we also investigated the effect of being in the first year, because the idea of shirking behavior is that in your first year, when your contract just started, you might underperform compared to what you would perform otherwise in a normal year. But we didn't find any effect of shirking behavior. We didn't keep it in the paper because there were some problems with the referee that are totally understandable. So we just excluded them, but they are included in the very first working paper version of this paper that was circulated in the working paper series of Tulane. That was my previous affiliation. All right, so if there is no question, I will go on to the heterogeneity analysis. Okay. So in the main analysis, we don't find any evidence of strategic behavior. And also, if you look at the literature, you find some conflicting results on whether there is strategic behavior or not, especially on the literature in sports. If you look at the working paper version or also the published version of the paper, we have a whole section about the strategy behavior in sport, like we have NBA, MLS, etc. But here in this specific case of the NHL, there are different free agents and they might have countervailing incentives. So what we observe in the main analysis, that is the lack of evidence of strategic behavior, might be due to the fact that there are different players. They are considered all together, and that might give like an absence of the result. So what we will do now is that we will investigate different players separately. Okay, so we start by dividing the players into 3 groups. First, the unrestricted free agents. They can move wherever they want at the end of the contract. Restricted free agents with low expected performance. Therefore, the ratio bonus to wage is high. And then restricted free agents with high expected performance. So this ratio is low. So here are the results. There are 3 panels: unrestricted free agents, restricted free agents with low expected performance, and restricted free agents with expected high performance. So here you see that these two are quite different. Like the sample of these two are quite different. While in theory one would observe similar subsample sizes, but That depends on how ties are managed and on the distribution of these values, right? So first, if we look at unrestricted free agents, we see that there is a positive effect only for plus minus per game. So for unrestricted free agents, when you are in the last season, you might be obtaining a larger plus minus per game. Then expected low performance restricted free agents, we see again that there might be a result that is negative and only for penalty minutes per game. While for expected high performance restricted free agents, there might be an effect only for points per game. So in the main analysis, there was no effect. In this first set of heterogeneity analysis, we find weak evidence of strategic behavior. Now, there is another aspect of players that we should consider. They don't differ only based on expected performance and free agency, but also based on continent of origin. Okay. So the idea is that the European skaters could behave differently because they face alternative options. This alternative option is characterized by non-pecuniary aspects. So they have higher potential mobility and could go back to Europe. And why it might be important for them? Because these players might decide to stay in NHL. They will receive higher salary, but they might be playing less. And that is problematic because especially in hockey, players want to go to the national team. It's very important. So for many players, it might be more valuable to get a lower salary, but get a higher rink time, right? To play more. While for North Americans in general, there is not much of a tendency to go to Europe. This is something that has changed only more recently, especially during COVID time and after COVID time. But before then, it was really peculiar for a North American to go to play in Europe unless there was a lockdown in NHL. So here are the analysis. Again, we divide the results in 3 panels for unrestricted free agents, expected low performance restricted free agents, and the expected high performance restricted free agents. The analyses are the same as those that I previously showed, but we also add an interaction between last season and the dummy for European. In this specification, we don't have the main effect for European because we use player fixed effects, right? So what we find here is that there is a positive effect for unrestricted free agents, North Americans, right here. While there is a negative effect on points per game for Europeans. Then there is a negative effect for expected low performance restricted free agents with 2 measures, points per game and penalty minutes per game. And then a positive effect for on points per game for Europeans. While for expected high performance restricted free agents, there is no evidence at all of strategic behavior. Now, we cannot really investigate why there are these different results, but we can speculate on them, right? So North American unrestricted free agents increased their performance. It was these results, at least as measured by plus minus per game. The thing is that they are expected to be less mobile than European colleagues because they less likely move to Europe. They don't have any valuable alternatives. They really want this contract renewal. Then moving to expected low performance restricted free agents and North Americans, we see that they reduce the performance, right? Year and year. Why could that be the case? Again, we can only speculate. A possibility is that they might be demotivated. So these are players that are not they are young, they are not that good, they don't have leverage for a contract renewal, they don't even consider to go back to go to Europe. Then moving to European unrestricted free agents. European unrestricted free agents. So we see that the result here is negative. So they reduce the performance. And why that? It's possible that they have lower incentives to try to do as best as they can in their last season. Because even if they received a contract renewal, if this contract renewal was bad, they just go back to Europe. Why is that different compared to North American restricted free agents? Because as I mentioned earlier, Europe, like the move back to Europe corresponds to a pay cut. You receive a lower salary, but there are non-pecuniary aspects, in particular a higher ice time and increased chances to be selected for the national team. So they might be preferring to just go back to Europe. And this is what also we find in our data set. We see that 17% of unrestricted free agents do return to Europe. So out of 16 European unrestricted free agents, 49 go back to Europe. Okay. So we looked into these European unrestricted free agents, and then we looked into each individual player online, and we looked at whether after that season they moved back to Europe or not. Then expected low performance European restricted free agents. We saw that there was a positive effect. And why that? So the thing is that they might want to remain in the best league in the world. They don't really want to go back to Europe while in the prime of their career. And why do they behave differently compared to North American low-skilled restricted free agents? So also in this case, we have some speculations. Because they want to acquire credentials by working in high-level institutions. So even if they don't get much of ice time in NHL, they can still say, hey, I was in NHL, so the longer you stay, the better might be your prospects when you will decide to go back to Europe. And also, if they decided to move immediately back to Europe, the prospects would not be that good probably, because they are still young, they have spent a short time in NHL, okay, and they are not that good. So it's not that for them it would be much easier to play in Europe, to be selected, right, by some teams. Also, there is this immigration literature that suggests that non-native players might have been positively selected in terms of grit and willingness to succeed. Okay. And finally, here we saw that for expected high-performance restricted free agents, there is no evidence whatsoever of strategic behavior, whether positive or negative. And why is that the case? Well, what we think is that regardless of their origin, the thing is that they are highly committed players. They are the best players also. So they tend to perform as best as they can, and they are the best players. So now to conclude, on average, players' performance doesn't vary, right? And this is somehow in line with the SHIS result on the paper published in 2023, where labor market and non-compete clauses are characterized by low mobility, right? So if you have non-compete clause, you expect low mobility. Then when we look into heterogeneous behaviors, we see that the result might depend on tenure, expected performance, and potential mobility. So tenured workers with high expected mobility, that is immigrants, may face good alternative job placements elsewhere, which is the case as we have seen for European players. While similar workers with low expected mobility, in this case the natives, the North Americans, face a narrower choice because they are less mobile, right? Instead, for the case of younger workers, the result depends on their expected mobility, but also their expected performance. As we have seen, there is quite a difference between high performance and low performance players. Now, I have a couple of slides also on future venues. What could be future studies? Future studies could investigate different dimensions of workers' performance and understand their role, because evidence of strategic behavior seems to emerge only for some measurement, while not for others, as we've seen in at least in NHL. So eventually the estimate of strategic behavior that you get, right, is just an average across players. And also in general, across workers, the result that you get might depend on what is the productivity related measures that dominates among the players, right? Or among the workers, among the employees in general. And then there is also this other interesting thing that it's something that I added compared to the working paper and also the published paper, that is something that happened in the past few weeks. I think it was April. So there was in US, they wanted a ban on non-compete clauses. And this could represent an important opportunity to dig further into issue of non-compete clauses in general. So one possible future venue is to further investigate the strategic behavior, right? Like we did in the study. But much of the study is based also on the existence of non-compete clauses. And here we see that there is this ban on non-compete clauses. We don't know yet whether it will be really enforced because it's discussed. But we've seen already some articles. I was looking into NPR again that suggested that it might actually impact several sectors of the sport industry. It's not clear to me yet whether a ban on non-compete clauses could also impact NHL players, like with the end of non-compete clauses, whether there could be an end also of the difference between unrestricted or unrestricted free agents, but very likely there will be an impact on other sports. For example, golf players who wants to move from a PGA Tour to LIV golf, or there are also NFL limitation to coaches' ability to interview with other teams. So when you are at the end of the contract, there could be like you could be restricted. You cannot really go to the team that you want. Also, other interesting things are the athletes' name, image, likeness rights that could be impacted by the ban on non-compete clauses. If this ban on non-compete clauses will be confirmed, then it will take place on September 4th, 2024. And it's currently on hold because, as we were discussing at the very beginning, this presentation. It's not certain yet whether it will be enforced or not. But it's still a very interesting venue because it will represent, of course, a natural experiment, right? Okay, this is it for my presentation. If you have any questions, I will be happy to clarify anything.
Great, thank you very much, Luca. I want to give you a team's round of applause. And it's time for any questions and comments people have. And Steve already has his hand up, so Steve, go ahead.
Luca, thank you very much. The contracts, as you pointed out, your study did not include a one-year contract.
Mm-hmm.
It was only for either people who are restricted under the collective bargaining agreement or those who have signed a multi-year agreement.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of questions for you. One is, given the potential strategic behavior for Europeans, why would a club allow, how would that affect the club's willingness to sign a European player to a multi-year contract if they were worried that the player would underperform in the last year of the contract? And then the second question is, given the lack of strategic behavior here, why are multi-year contracts, in your opinion, so prevalent in sport, but so rare outside of sport?
So, okay, why European players would be offered a contract if teams were worried that they would underperform at the end. Well, it's one of the things is that it's probably hard to tell whether a player is underperforming or not, because there is also the issue that they are older and they are getting older, in particular in the case of unrestricted free agents. And also, when we were looking at the literature, there aren't so many studies, in particular, so many studies on strategic behavior. Most of the studies in sport or in the labor market in general, they focus on shirking behavior. While in strategic behavior, there isn't really much going on. There are only a few studies. So did that answer your question?
That was the first one. The
And
second one is why, in your opinion, is sports heavily characterized by multi-year contracts, where this is rarer in in most other industries?
That is an interesting question. I don't really know about that. One thing also that is very interesting is that actually things have changed in the last few years, because at the beginning, not at the beginning, but until a few years ago, in NHL it was possible to sign absurd contracts, something like more than 10 years long. But for some reason they changed this thing in NHL. I don't know why they changed
Yes.
it, but
The
they
reason
changed.
I can tell you, I can give you the reason for that. The reason they changed extremely long contracts is that extremely long contracts were simply ways to evade the salary cap. So if you have a player,
With the connection.
I'm sorry.
There's a problem with the connection.
Are you back, Luca, or are you I guess we have to wait and see if Luke is able to reconnect. Quite lucky that in 4 years of doing this has never happened before. Luca, you've moved. Luca, you're moving now. Maybe we got you back. You're on mute. There you go.
Fortunately, internet in this month is set to no. I don't know. I'm really sorry. Okay. Okay, we're back.
Okay,
Great.
very good.
Welcome back.
I cannot hear you now.
You can't hear any of us?
Okay, no, let's see on mute. If there is someone on mute, no. Okay. Okay, now I think everything is back.
Okay, good.
But I cannot hear you.
Oh, can you hear me, Luca? I can hear Steve, so I don't know if it's something at your end.
Oh,
he's gone. Hopefully to return. Can you hear us now, Luca?
Okay, yes, thanks.
Great.
Okay, I'll just to quickly finish the long-term contract problem in the National Hockey League is, let's say I view Luca as worth $100 million over 5 years to my team. But that would be $20 million a year under the salary cap, and I want to hire more people. So instead, I sign you to a $100 million contract for 10 years, knowing that you're going to have no value in the last 10 years, but it pushes the annual salary further away because of the salary cap. So it's not it's really just a way of evading the salary cap. And because of that, that's why the clubs outlawed that.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Next, we've got Georgi with a question.
Hi, Luca. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. So my 2 questions, and I'll give them in order. So I'll give you the chance to respond to the first one before asking the second. They're both related to playing time. And so don't you agree that due to the large numbers, perhaps, the more playing time you get as a player, if you're a core player, skater on the ice, the more likely your plus-minus score will converge to the true team total. So if that is true, and you agree with me here, then isn't that true that on really bad teams and some years, teams that don't score a lot, but end up being scored on a lot, the plus minuses are not really going to be reflective of the true player quality. Hence, there will be some sort of a disturbance there. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's possible. We have conducted other analysis actually in the first version of the paper. We looked at the absolute value of the performances, and also that didn't change. We also looked into whether there was a deviation in this. Now we have a deviation from the mean of the team, but at the beginning we had the own performance without accounting for the mean of the team. But still, yeah, what you said, it's really possible. Yeah, we are controlling also for team fixed effect, also team time season, not in the analysis that I showed, but in analysis that are in the appendix. So that should control for that, I think. Although plus minus depends on the team. If you said it's the performance measure that depends the most on the team. So I don't know. I don't know what, because so one thing that I pointed out at in the conclusion, in particular for future studies, it would be interesting not only to look into mechanism, why different people perform differently, but also looked at different performance measures. Like in this case, we have focused on the performance measures that can be included in the bonuses that are the only ones that are included in the collective agreement. But there could be, like in other sports, when you can incentivize players based on whatever performance you want, then it could be interesting to see other things, because we cannot really tell in this case much, because we have a limited set of performances. But yeah, what you said makes total sense. Yeah. Thank you.
And then just really quickly, thank you for your answer. Just really quickly, so don't teams that so like essentially what RFA is, and I'm not sure if you would agree, and correct me if I'm understanding this wrong, but this is sort of a free trial period in a way that up till the player is 27, you can match the contract that anyone else offers and the player stays. So if the team really likes the player stays. So that is in part done to help teams develop their own players and grow players within the system. So if that goes through and I'm an RFA player whose contract is expiring, the team is probably not going to be that incentivized to invest in me if they already know by the start of my last season that I'm no good. So then I'm not going to be giving as much playing time, or the team is not going to be interested in my future. Hence, I'm going to be given, as a fourth liner, the assignment of defending the first line. Hence, if you're only on the ice against the best players of most other teams, your plus minus is going to be depreciated through that regards. So do you think that teams sort of use that last season as a punishment, if you will, on players they know they're not going to be resigning?
It depends on the moment that you are observing, because usually, like if you are in the last season of your first 3-year contract, you are slated almost automatically to sign the contract renewal, unless you're really bad. Usually players stay there. It's basically impossible for players at that age to move somewhere else. We have looked into how many players who were restricted free agent move at the end of the contract when they were, I don't know, 24, so at the end of the first 3 years, but it's like maybe just a handful of players over, I don't know, 30 years or something. That's why we mentioned at the beginning that there are like written rules and also tacit rules, because it's like they don't want to steal each other's players. Also for players, it's like, in particular, if you are young, you are really incentivized, maybe not just monetarily, but also by the fame, right? Because NHL is really followed. It's not maybe as popular as other American games. But if you underperform, yeah, you won't have a really bright future.
Great. Thanks, Georgi. Dennis
Thanks.
has his hand up.
Thanks for the interesting talk. I just have really two questions and then a comment. The first question is, I didn't see any control for injury differences. And I know in North American sports, one of the issues is that after you've signed your contract, a long-term contract, that you suddenly become more prone to injury, that you're not available as often. And you didn't address that as an issue. And so I would like you to speculate on that.
Yeah, sure. So unfortunately, we didn't have a stat on injuries. What we had is just matches played. In the first version of the paper, we have amount of matches was the fourth measure that we looked at. But there was some issue with the referees, etc. But indeed, what you say is very super interesting, and it's true because, like, for instance, I remember a study in MLS, I think, that they found that toward the end, not toward the end, but in certain situations, players shirk by just pretending injuries. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I know in
actually,
Major League Baseball that's the case, that people are on the injured list more often.
and actually, I had the idea for this paper some years ago when there was this affair, Icardi affair, when he played in Inter. At the very end of the at the very end of the contract, he pretended he was injured, like all the time. It was incredible, and also something similar happened also recently. So it's very likely that some players do something different in terms of injuries or pretended injuries, but unfortunately we didn't have this specific measure. We had only this amount of matches played in the season, but that doesn't reflect much probably injuries, etc. Because one could also pretend to be injured and maybe will be put in the ring, but just only for a very short time each match. Sometimes it happens, so yeah, it wouldn't be super good. So we have excluded that measure, but it would have been interesting injuries.
My second question is related to positional differences. So my impression was that you did not include any sort of indication between defensemen and forwards. And I'm sure you didn't include goalkeepers because I'm not sure what sense it would make for most of that. But defensemen, their job really isn't to score points. So while collecting assists and so on might be a useful thing to also include, it seems to me that you may underestimate the impact if you're including defensemen with forwards when you're looking at points. And the plus minus, I understand the paper's already accepted. I would just throw that thing out. I think that's the dumbest measure possible, because just because I'm on the ice when I'm on the ice with Wayne Gretzky and he scores a bunch of goals, I get credit for that, even though I'm basically just standing there watching.
Yeah.
And so I don't buy that measure as really much of a meaningful measure. But that's a different.
No, I totally get it. In fact,
Talk to me about the positional differences.
we were discussing also between co-authors and then also with the referees, and some actually various people have suggested to use like more modern measures. Now I don't remember the name of these measures, but I don't remember them. The problem is that these measures, that they might be better, they are not included in collective agreements, and they cannot be used to incentivize players. They are not that is very peculiar. I didn't expect that. But there are only 4 measures that can be, and those more modern measures are not cannot be used. Also,
So the
coming
plus
back to
minus
your
measure is in the collective bargaining agreement?
yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And so you mentioned this thing of the role. Yes, we should have thought about that, like an heterogeneity analysis where we look at different how the results changed based on different roles of the players. We didn't think of that. Now we are controlling for player fixed effect, so that is absorbed. But we should have looked into the different roles. And goalkeepers, as you mentioned, is not included in the analysis because they are like totally different players.
Mhm. And then my comment is, if I understood right, what you found was that the European players perform worse in the last season of their contract.
Mm-hmm.
And then your argument is that they have the outside option of going to Europe.
Yeah.
And lots of them do. Well, if I'm a
Mhm.
manager and I watch this guy underperform, I'm going to get rid of him. So
Yeah,
yes, I
yeah.
would expect underperformance is rewarded by getting released to go play someplace else.
Yeah, I think it was the first comment that we the first questions the first question at the end of the presentation. I don't remember who was who asked it, but
Steve.
yeah, the thing, yeah, Steve, exactly. The thing is that based on what we observed in the literature, there isn't much about strategic behavior. And also, it's really hard to tell whether players are strategically behaving or they are not just old.
That was what I thought was that it's just old guys are getting released.
Hmm. So
Because you're
it's
going to be
hard.
older when you're an unrestricted free agent, right?
So the thing is that it's possible that there are many studies on strategic behavior, and it's also easy to confuse like underperformance, like if you are willingly underperform or you are not just putting enough of an effort as usual, or you are just old. So it's possible that there are some confounders, so it's not really easy for the managers of the teams to tell what is the issue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, Dennis. Next is Stefan.
Hi, Luca. Very
Hi,
interesting
Stefan.
paper.
Thank you.
I'm going to say the thing I always say whenever these papers come up, and there are a lot of these papers, is that I don't understand how there's moral hazard in this case. In a moral hazard, the principal asks the agent to carry out an action, but cannot observe whether the agent carries out the action. I don't know what action is being unobserved here. Players are subject to the most intense scrutiny. We watch every moment of their behavior. How could they possibly be shirking or underperforming? And why would they underperform? With as you point out in your paper, they're concerned about their next contract. So one thing is if you're skating around on the ice doing twirls and not playing hockey, then I would have thought that the next potential employer is watching and saying, "Oh, they're not really giving their all anymore." So I can't see the logic of this. And then the other thing is then and in your paper, I'm confused about this distinction between strategic behavior and moral hazard. I'm not sure what you mean by the difference. What is strategic behavior? Again, does strategic behavior mean you're doing what the principal wants or not what the principal wants? It sounds to me like there's not even a theoretical distinction between strategic behavior here and moral hazard, let alone an observable difference. So, what's your view on that?
I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure about how to answer this. So it's absurdly hot here, and I'm thinking that I'm not passing out, but almost. So going back to the first question, what I think it actually happened is not a choice, but it's something more implicit. Now, for instance, I think about what is called in the discrimination literature in the labor market like implicit discrimination. Like you are not willingly doing something, but the situation is so tense, you are under such a pressure. But there are also situations that might impact the way you behave in a way that you cannot really control. So it's possible that they are not really choosing to underperform.
So then
but
they
they are not.
can't be being strategic then, can they? Because to have a strategy, you have to be conscious of what you're doing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That.
Oh, I think he's gone again. He's got too much for his internet connection.
I think the internet connection's melted.
Okay,
Okay,
I'm back.
Uh,
I was mentioning that it's something that we use to relate to the existing literature. But what I think that is actually going on is that, in particular for strategic behavior, is not really a decision that players have, or at
okay,
least most of
can
the
I just
time.
make an appeal that we're building, there are just every year there are more papers come out about shirking and moral hazard and behavior. And as you say, there is no foundation for this, but in order to build on that literature, you then use the same terminology. So we just perpetuate this kind of weird mischaracterization of the situation that we're observing. And I think some point, I hope some point we're going to stop doing this, because it doesn't make any sense. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what effect you're capturing, but I think you just agreed it's not strategic behavior, and it's not obviously moral hazard. So whatever it is, it's something new in the literature. It's not something that's established.
Yeah, it's possible. It is totally possible. It would be interesting in the future with to study these things with better data. More data, maybe data also in the labor market, like in the standard labor market, and see how things are actually going on, how things are relating. Also, it would be interesting to relate to the behavioral economics literature, so something that uses experiments to dig better into mechanisms. And this is something that we couldn't do with this data. We could just refer to the literature, but I totally agree with you that it's probably not actually strategic behavior. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Stefan. Steve,
Thank you, Stefan.
I'd like to go back to a couple of comments. One in reverse order to build on Stefan's comment, and then go back to Dennis's comment. On Stefan's comment, it sounds to me, and I'm not an expert in any of these areas, as Stefan will readily attest, that what you're really talking about is some sort of unconscious or cognitive bias. And especially with European players who are thinking about going home or something like that. And so to me, I would like to sort of just offer for you to think about, building on Stefan's work, that Stefan's comment, that this isn't something as part of some other literature on strategic behavior. And I don't know how much of the literature on strategic behavior works or doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
But because if your theory is that it is not a conscious shirking, and it is observable, but there's also all sorts of restrictions and limits on rosters that make it very difficult for a team who observes a Swiss player who's really thinking about how wonderful it will be to go back to yodeling in the Alps the next year, how hard they're playing. So I would encourage you to think about this as an example of unconscious behavior, which may actually be a much more novel and important contribution in the literature. And then going back to Dennis, and this is obviously beyond the scope of your paper, but for you and certainly your Canadian co-authors who are working in this. Dennis, I don't know that much about hockey, and I defer to Dennis. I accept that a prominent sports economist does not think plus minus is a very important statistic. It is my understanding that a lot of people in hockey use plus minus a lot and actually think it's valuable. And so one of the things you might want to do is, or your colleagues in future work, is cross-check correlations between free agent play and plus minus. And hockey executives are smart enough to know that if Luca's scoring all the goals and Steve is just watching on the ice, so I have a huge plus minus, that would predict that I would not be very well paid if it's really had nothing to do with me. On the other hand, if plus minus has a pretty positive correlation to salary, then it strikes me that plus minus is a perfectly valid theory, and the fact that brilliant economists don't agree with hockey executives about what's a valid theory should not deter other economists from using a metric that the market actually uses.
Yeah, it's interesting. It relates to, I don't know, like free riding or shirking behavior. Like if you are really, like as you said, you are in the ring, right? But you are not really doing that much, and you might say, oh, okay, my plus minus is very high because other people are scoring. But again, if you are not playing that well, and maybe there is another player who are thinking what you are thinking, then it's 2 players already out of I don't remember how many are playing in 6. It's quite a large percentage, so it's less likely for your team to score.
Dennis, right of reply.
So, 2 things. The first is simply that Luca mentioned that plus minus is in the collective bargaining agreement. So if it's in the collective bargaining agreement, that's a reason to use it, whether full of themselves sports economists think that it's a bullshit measure or not. Since the collective bargaining agreement uses it, it ought to be used. Now, as a somewhat different response, it is the case that defenders are paid far less than forwards. So in the market, it would be the case that yes, the people who are sort of free riding on this plus minus measure are not paid as much as those who are really doing the heavy lifting and generating it.
Great. Thanks, Dennis. Luca, any response? Not that
I
it's necessary.
thought it was a comment, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Any more questions and comments? Looks like it's a no, which is great, which is fine because we've had a very good discussion. And thank you, Luca, for a really interesting talk. Thank you,
Well, thank you all
everyone,
for all the comments.
contributions.
Very interesting. Also to think about possible future studies and how to where to go or to deviate compared to the existing literature.
Absolutely. And just to also say congratulations on your recent publication of the paper, Luca. It was good
Thank
to
you.
see sports economics work in general interest journals and sport contributing in a way that we know it can. And obviously this is one of the purposes of having these seminars and the various things that we do. So it's good to see that, and thank you for presenting it to help with their future research and dissemination. We will call it quits for this week. We'll return next week on the 19th of July when we have Brian Moran from Wake Forest University presenting Narrow Paths Out of Poverty and Educational Demand, Evidence from Dominican Baseball. So our current foray into different sports continues next week. We had beach volleyball last week, hockey this week, and next week baseball. I look very much forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks once again, Luca.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.